Donald Trump has no interest in this. It's one of the deals that he will move on from. Most of his career, even in business, has been about make a deal and do a runner before it actually unravels, or indeed, if it doesn't look like happening, then blame immediately the person sitting next to him on the left and say it's all their fault. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think he's preparing the ground to say, I tried, these guys, and then let's have a trade deal with Russia, because I think he's much more interested in that type of arrangement. Russia doesn't seem to have any qualms about levels of corruption or indeed propriety in the rule of law, and that will suit Donald Trump's deals very well.
Altogether, the two biggest stories of the moment. President Trump is trying to persuade Vladimir Putin to stop the bloodbath in Ukraine. The American leader is dangling the possibility of more trade if the Russians make peace. Meanwhile, the deal between the UK and the EU includes a formal defence and security pact, the beginnings of a response to the uncertainty over what Russia might do next. But you couldn't call either decisive developments. We spoke to the Times special correspondent Anthony Lloyd earlier. He's in Ukraine. He told us that people there were weary and wary both of the way Donald Trump carried out his diplomacy and everyone else's reaction to it.
I think Ukrainians are very tired and very frustrated of the fervour and the interest in the international community that is paid to every remark and comment that Trump makes, which so often seem incoherent, not just here, but to the wider international audience. They are, say, stoic and depressed. But no, it's not like anybody came away with the news of the phone conversation between Putin and Trump yesterday thinking, great, well, there's a positive change to our situation.
So the war goes on.
The war goes on.
That was the Times' Anthony Lloyd speaking to us earlier. Well, listening to that was Ben Wallace, the former Conservative Defence Secretary at the start of the war and a committed supporter of Ukraine. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with that phone call overnight. I mean, how hopeful are you that it could really be the difference here when it comes to peace talks between Russia and Ukraine?
I'm not very hopeful, I'm afraid. I think throughout this, Donald Trump has just consistently let Putin off the hook. I think 4 times he threatened sanctions if he didn't have a ceasefire, sanctions if he didn't do he was requested, and every time Putin just said, no, I'm not doing it. Didn't even turn up in Turkey the other day, having Trump bullied Zelensky to turn up himself. And so, I think the reality is Donald Trump has no interest in this. It's one of the deals that he will move on from. Most of his career, even in business, has been about make a deal and do a runner before it actually unravels, or indeed, if it doesn't look like happening, then blame immediately the person sitting next to him on the left and say it's all their fault. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think he's preparing the ground to say, I tried, these guys, and then let's have a trade deal with Russia, because I think he's much more interested in that type of arrangement. Russia doesn't seem to have any qualms about levels of corruption or indeed propriety in the rule of law, and that will suit Donald Trump's deals very well. So I think those are where he's really angling for.
So you think Donald Trump could pursue a financial deal with Russia even if there is no progress in peace talks? He'd just shun that side of the conversation completely.
Yeah, and he's alluded to that since this phone call. And I think, Donald Trump will see, bizarrely, Putin as some form of equal. He talks about trying to get him back into the G8. The talking points from the State Department are now that somehow Crimea could be recognized as part of Russia, which would go against all international law, that you can't take borders by force and then expect the international community to recognize it. And there's no sense that all of this is caused not even by the Russian generals, but it's caused by Putin's ego and determination to rewrite history. And those are millions of people who have been displaced, murdered, killed, injured from both sides of the conflict. And it's all the responsibility of one man. And Donald Trump seems to think, spending lots of time on the telephone to him and being constantly humiliated by him when he just refuses to do anything that Trump requests him is some way the way to proceed. And, let's move on to a trade deal, because he understands that language. No doubt there'll be a golf resort somewhere near St. Petersburg, I suspect, soon.
Given what you've just said about America and about Russia and President Putin's position, what can and should the UK do now? Because it seems from some of the most recent remarks made by the Defence Secretary that the UK is not willing to hold out on Crimea not being part of Russia. And realistically, we can increase sanctions, but without American sanctions, there is not going to be enough of a difference made here to force Putin's hand. What can and should the UK do now?
I think the first thing is what we've all known all the way through this is that the US aren't going to ride to the rescue in the way that I think some people had optimistically hoped. And I think that in the end, we're either going to have to stick by our comments and step up to the plate, and all of us in Europe, and there's, it's a big bloc, remember, it's 300 million plus people. It's one of the richest blocs in the world and continents in the world, that we step up and we fund Ukraine to defend itself, and we take action on sanctions. Remember, for all of the point about, only the US can shift the dial. I don't quite believe that. Russia is very, very keen to start selling its gas again to Europe. Its economy is in a very perilous state, a much worse state than the official figures. And in fact, numerous reports only this week pointed that out. And Russia is currently now in hock to the Chinese. So I think ultimately, we should believe in ourselves. We should stand up for what we believe and pull together with those people that do. And, all the way through this, I was constantly told, this will escalate. If you do this, Putin will do that. And actually, he's a bully. He's a little bully, and you need to stand up to him. And when you do, you find he doesn't do anything, or he usually backs down or goes and do something else. And I think what we need to do is focus on finding a way to allow Ukraine to hold the line. No one's talking about Ukraine massively invading another part of Russia or doing any of those things, but it's about giving it the strength, both economically and indeed militarily, to make sure that the cost is such to Russia that he really has to start focusing on his economy from the Kremlin rather than focusing on invading another country. And let's not forget, every single one of these things could be stopped right now if he stopped invading. And he doesn't.
Should the UK government refuse to accept that Crimea becomes Russian in any form of deal? Should that be a red line for us?
Yes, it should. It's a principle of international law. I mean, it's what we've stood on even before the Second World War. You cannot take another country's borders by force. And, if we accept that, because America might accept that, then we are in a very slippery slope of where we'll all end up to. And that's the wrong thing to do. At the very least, we should make it very, very clear that this is a state that was agreed to by the former Soviet Union. It was a guaranteed, which we all then let them down, in Budapest, including the US and the UK, as Ukraine handed back its nuclear weapons to the then Russian state. That is the rule of law. That's the rules, right? We don't go around invading countries. And, I know people will quote the Iraq War. At the very least, with the Iraq War, we weren't seeking to own the Iraq War and make it a part of the United Kingdom or the United States or any other country. But, one of the reasons, another article, today is about Israel and this deep unease internationally about whether they're seeking to invade and take other people's state. That is what we stand for. So I hope we never do it. And we also remember that if you did do it, you're doing it for a man who's akin to Adolf Hitler in his strategy and his tactics, his ethnic nationalism. That would be awful.
I was going to go on to ask you about Israel, but you've raised it here. Do you agree with a statement which has come out of the governments of the UK, Canada and France overnight, that Benjamin Netanyahu has gone too far and called for the renewed military offensive to cease immediately?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I said over 18 months ago, I think it was, that Israel has an absolute right under international law to defend itself, to go after the perpetrators of that crime. It doesn't have the right to use excessive force to the extent that we've seen and continue to see. It doesn't have a right to use or block humanitarian aid to civilians.
Are we seeing a war crime? Is that what we're seeing, a war crime?
I'm not a lawyer to sit here and tell you what defines a war crime. And I heard Priti Patel quite rightly make some very valid points just before me. The people who are in possession of the intelligence of what the threat is will be the United Kingdom government and Israeli government and indeed the Americans and others. And you can only decide what you're doing is proportionate if you are aware of what the enemy or the adversary is doing. Now, I do think, however, it is wrong to talk about ceasefires with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. You look at its charter, it's the same to Al-Qaeda. But how you go about rooting them out and defeating them will involve a political solution at some stage that allows the rest of the Palestinian population to move forward.
Is that recognizing a Palestinian state? Is now the time to consider that?
I don't think we should do it right now. I think if we do it right now, we'd be viewed as rewarding Hamas for those atrocities that it committed. But I do think we need some restraint now from the Israeli side. We need to go right back to the challenges around policy and, the two-state solution, which seems to have died a death. And in fact, if the media is to believe what Israel's trying to achieve is a one-state solution, which is just Israel. I mean, you just played the clip of one of their I think their finance minister, what he was talking about. And that's not what the international community supports either. It's not what the UN and the US support.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get back to a stage of trying to find a political solution alongside getting those hostages back.
Finally, there is a lot of talk around about the UK-EU defence deal. Well, it's a part of the broader deal, but the Defence Pact is a big part of that. Access to a €150 billion fund. We don't know, crucially, how much the UK would have to pay in, nor how much of that fund UK firms would have access to in terms of bidding. But do you agree with, in principle, what the government seems to be trying to do here? Is it a good idea?
Well, I heard Stig earlier about this thing. Is I don't know what the government's trying to do because there's almost no detail. I think what I could sum up about the document, and I've read it 3 or 4 times trying to look for something, it's a mixture of waffle and concrete. I mean, the concrete measure is give French fishermen another extension for years of access to our fishing rights. That seems to be a concrete issue. Even the passport e-gates is not as it seems or as it was spun by the spinners. The EU says or reiterates that the nation states could, if they want, allow Brits to use e-gates, but it's not going to tell them to use it. So that's not really going to change in many countries who don't want us, who want us to pay the price of leaving. And then when I looked at the defence section, about 80% of those things are just committees and things we could already do already. I mean, PESCO is one of the vehicles for defence. We were seeking back in 2022, I think, to join one of its mobility programs, which was a study into how you actually can move forces across Europe. It wasn't earth-shattering. And when it comes to the actual fund, there's nothing specific in this document at all. And I think the reason it's nothing specific is there is only really about 5 big spenders in the European continent on defence: France, Italy, Germany, Poland. They're really the big defence spenders. And the United Kingdom. And lots of our companies are completely multinational. BAE owns a company in Sweden. It also owns lots of companies here. Thales is French, but Thales UK is a very big employer. We all work into different programs where we either build components or we stick it together. The Typhoon is made by 4 countries.
So not a good deal then?
It's not a deal. It's not a deal, Kate. There's a worrying trend here from Number 10, which is they have a sort of, the balloons and the fireworks about some great deal in the White House or great deal with India, and then almost no details emerge at all. And it seems to be a press release followed by 1 or 2 little concessions. And it seems so far that the concessions that are concrete are all in the favour of the other negotiator, doesn't seem to be in favour of us. So I think we need to see the detail.
Ben Wallace, former Conservative Defence Secretary, many thanks for your time this morning.